Carl Jung recorded a psychological phenomenon so unsettling that he described it as one of the hardest transformations he had ever seen in human nature. Across numerous cases, he encountered patients, especially empaths, who appeared fragile and gentle, until something within them finally snapped. I call them the awakened ones. These were individuals who embodied Jung's notion of shadow integration, and in doing so, they not only altered their personal lives but also reshaped the way we view human psychology. For decades, Jung studied patterns in empathic personalities that mirrored the principles of shadow work. What he uncovered still unsettles psychologists today. The kindest people are not weak, they are simply weapons awaiting their forging. The archives from Jung's Zurich clinic expose a troubling consistency. Patient after patient arrived bearing the same emotional scars, empaths who had been systematically dismantled by those claiming to love them. They carried bruises they excused away, depression they blamed on themselves, and a relentless tendency to apologize merely for existing. Jung meticulously noted these repeating traits across dozens of cases. These people had spent their lives absorbing the pain of others, the rage of alcoholic parents, betrayal of spouses, dysfunction within families. They became what I call the emotional shock absorbers of their environments. Perfect examples of Jung's observation that sensitive souls often become vessels of collective psychological suffering. But here is where Jung's discovery turned chilling. These empaths were not merely enduring mistreatment, they were cataloging it. When asked to describe their relationships, Jung expected the incoherent fragments of wounded minds. Instead, he found something that completely overturned his assumptions. These individuals weren't shattered by abuse, they had been studying it. Empaths, Jung discovered, carried detailed mental archives of every person who had ever caused them harm. They knew their abusers' insecurities, triggers, and hidden fears. With surgical precision, they mapped emotional dynamics. And they never once acted on this knowledge, until something finally pushed them to their breaking point. Jung wrote that the empathic mind functioned not as a victim's diary but more like a strategist's war room, quietly awaiting activation. If you've ever felt underestimated in your awareness, note this: I see everything. Jung came to understand that he wasn't treating victims. He was facing what I call hidden psychological prodigies. Their abilities reflected his theories on advanced psychological functions that some people unconsciously develop. Their genius did not lie in creating. It was in emotional archaeology. They could unearth the deepest wounds of others by reading nothing more than fleeting micro-expressions. Intrigued, Jung began testing their skills. Without any prior information, these patients identified his colleagues' childhood traumas, recurring relationship dynamics, and professional insecurities, often with accuracy rates exceeding 95%. What unsettled Jung most was that these empaths weren't mystical or clairvoyant. They were simply observing with a level of focus most people never reach. What the world calls intuition, they considered data collection. Jung realized something groundbreaking about empaths. They don't just feel more intensely, they process emotional data faster and with greater accuracy than anyone else. Their minds are wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. Yet society conditioned them to view this gift as a curse. Each time they tried to articulate what they perceived, the lies, the manipulation, the unspoken agendas, they were dismissed as too sensitive or overly emotional. Eventually, they learned to silence themselves, to distrust their own perceptions, to apologize for noticing what others could not. But truth does not vanish simply because it's unspoken. It lingers, accumulating, sometimes for decades. Jung observed that empaths don't unravel because they feel too much. They unravel because they are told their feelings are invalid. And so he realized these weren't breakdowns he was witnessing, they were breakthroughs. Again and again, he noted the same pattern. Their transformation was not slow and steady. It erupted in one explosive moment, an embodiment of Jung's understanding of shadow integration under immense pressure. The common trigger, Jung found, was always betrayal. And not just any betrayal, but one inflicted by the very person the empath had fully trusted and protected. Again and again, his case notes reflected the same storyline. The empath uncovered infidelity, financial deceit, or emotional manipulation from their closest companion. The devastation lay not only in the act itself, but in the painful realization that they had noticed the signals all along, and chosen to ignore them. These patients behaved as empaths typically do. They said nothing. They carried the wound in silence. They blamed themselves and redoubled their efforts to be flawless partners, children, or friends. But then came the turning point. What I call the clarity event. It was the moment when the empath's unparalleled pattern recognition finally outweighed their desperate need to see the good in people. This represented, in Jung's view, a profound form of psychological awakening. Most assumed such individuals would collapse into tears, rage, or despair. Their abusers expected that too, bracing for emotional chaos. What happened instead was something no one anticipated, and it unnerved everyone present. The empaths grew unnaturally calm. Jung described this as the moment when their analytical mind fused with their emotional intelligence, creating what he called the most chilling psychological transformation he had ever witnessed. These empaths did not lash out. They did not scream. They simply began to speak the truth. With precision rather than malice, they laid bare everything they had seen, recorded, and endured. It was less vengeance than dissection, like a surgeon identifying diseased tissue before carefully removing it. What emerged was not revenge. It was clarity. For the first time, their extraordinary perceptiveness was no longer a tool for forgiveness. It became a scalpel for exposure. Jung's observations echoed timeless wisdom. There is no greater fury than that of someone who has finally learned to trust their own perception. He recognized this not as an act of retaliation but as shadow integration, the critical point when a person stops denying the pieces of themselves they were conditioned to suppress. The empath's shadow was never malice. It was their silenced intellect, their muted intuition, their disowned strength. And once those aspects were integrated, they became what Jung described as psychologically whole. The most unsettling discovery for Jung was that this transformation was irreversible. These individuals did not slide back into people-pleasing. They did not apologize for boundaries. They no longer doubted their insight. They had become something Jung quietly feared, empaths who could never again be manipulated. The metamorphosis extended far beyond the psyche. Within months, their external lives shifted. They dismantled toxic relationships with precision, severed ties with destructive family members without unnecessary conflict, and rebuilt new lives on their own terms. Jung called them selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but now fiercely deliberate about where that care was directed. Even more disturbing was how their presence altered the atmosphere around them. Those who once dominated or deceived them now felt inexplicably uneasy in their company. Though the empaths weren't hostile or cruel, everyone sensed that something profound had changed. Jung gave this phenomenon a name: the predator's instinct. Manipulators instinctively recognized that their tactics no longer had power, just as predators sense when prey has transformed into something untouchable. They avoided these awakened empaths like shadows retreating from sunlight. Jung remarked, "The awakened empath does not need to declare their strength. Others feel it in their bones." Comment if people began treating you differently once you found your backbone. Most notice the change before you even voice it. Jung's fascination with these cases extended far beyond professional curiosity. What unsettled him most was how deeply he resonated with them. For in their transformations, he recognized fragments of his own journey. Jung himself was what today might be called a highly sensitive person. Jung understood the empath's path from within. He knew firsthand the torment of perceiving what others could not see and feeling what others refused to acknowledge. These cases forced him to wrestle with a disturbing question. What happens when empaths stop serving as society's emotional shock absorbers and begin applying their abilities with deliberate intent? For years, Jung tracked the lives of these transformed patients after integration, and what he uncovered haunted him. These individuals had become remarkably successful. Their careers flourished because they could anticipate clients' true needs before a word was spoken. Their new relationships thrived because they could detect emotional predators almost instantly. Their decisions proved unshakably sound because they trusted their intuitive intelligence without hesitation. And then Jung realized something that chilled him. These empaths had not lost their capacity for compassion, they had perfected it, which meant they had also become perfectly strategic. They now possessed the ability to manipulate others as effortlessly as they themselves had once been manipulated. Their grasp of human psychology elevated them to an almost omnipotent position in social interactions. Yet what terrified Jung most was not their power itself, but their restraint. These awakened empaths could have dismantled the lives of every person who had harmed them. Instead, They simply excised toxic influences and continued forward. Jung recognized in them the emergence of what he called the integrated empath, a person who retains the full sensitivity to feel everything yet combines it with the wisdom to decide where that energy should flow. In his private notes, Jung wrote with awe and unease, "I have witnessed something both beautiful and terrible. These individuals have become what every manipulator fears most. Someone who sees through them entirely, yet requires nothing from them. If you have reached the point where you can read people but no longer crave their approval, you might write, 'I see you, but I don't need you.'" This was the very essence of the transformation Jung recorded. But these changes did not unfold in isolation. Jung documented how their metamorphosis reverberated through every system they once supported. Family structures began to crumble, not because the empaths destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. Alcoholic relatives were forced to face addiction without the empath's constant buffering. Depressed family members had to seek new sources of validation. Manipulative siblings lost their favored target for emotional blows. Here Jung realized the full magnitude of the awakened empath. Their transformation compelled everyone around them either to evolve or to reveal their true character. The healthy individuals grew stronger under their example, while toxic ones exposed themselves in desperate attempts to drag the empath back into old dynamics. Jung referred to this phenomenon as the empath's mirror effect. These transformed people no longer needed to confront dysfunction directly. Their very presence reflected it back with painful clarity. Manipulators avoided them, feeling stripped bare and unable to deploy their usual tactics. By contrast, authentic individuals felt safe for the first time in their company. Jung's research demonstrated that awakened empaths functioned as living truth detectors, not by casting judgment but simply by being present. The most unsettling discovery came when he introduced these transformed patients to others in his practice. Within minutes, they identified core psychological wounds and even the specific forms of therapy required. Jung realized their diagnostic accuracy often surpassed his own hard-earned expertise. This revelation left him with an ethical dilemma that haunted him. If empaths could naturally evolve such profound psychological insight, what would that mean for the very future of psychology? Quietly, he began to formalize his observations, developing what I refer to as the Integration Observation Protocol, a framework to study how such transformations arise organically within sensitive individuals. Jung's Integration Observation Framework was not therapy in the conventional sense. It was his systematic documentation of how empaths, after profound betrayal, naturally developed what I call warrior consciousness. Across his case notes, he mapped consistent stages of this transformation. The first stage was recognition. Here, empaths learned to identify the shadow aspects they had been taught to suppress, not only their anger, but also their intelligence, strength, and inherent right to boundaries. In this phase, they stopped pathologizing their perceptions and began trusting their emotional intelligence as the sophisticated data processing system it truly was. The second stage, integration, was far more intense. Jung watched as these individuals fused their light and shadow selves into what he authentically described as the complete self. They became people capable of extraordinary kindness toward those who deserved it and ruthless precision toward those who did not. Then came the third stage, application, the one Jung found most fascinating. Integrated empaths no longer used their emotional intelligence solely as a defense mechanism. They began deploying it strategically. They evolved into what I call psychological architects. Individuals who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with near-supernatural precision. Jung noted that these transformed empaths had become immune to victimization. They recognized manipulation from miles away and neutralized it before it could take root. These people did more than heal. They became resistant to psychological abuse while preserving their capacity for authentic love and deep connection. In his private notes, Jung wrote with astonishment, "I have observed the development of compassion paired with wisdom. These individuals are now among the most psychologically powerful people I have ever encountered." The process's final stage was what Jung called the natural return to service. Integrated empaths did not turn cold or detached. Instead, they became selectively generous with their gifts. They began helping other empaths through the same transformation, forming what Jung documented as a network of psychologically resilient individuals. Jung's work with these cases sent ripples outward that continue to this day. He came to see that empaths were not mentally ill at all. They were evolutionarily advanced individuals trying to survive in systems designed to exploit their abilities. Empathic sensitivity was not a disorder to cure but a psychological capability to understand and protect. Yet Jung also noted a troubling possibility. In the wrong conditions, these abilities could become dangerous. An empath who integrated their shadow without ethical grounding could turn profoundly manipulative. This realization led him to develop what I call the ethical integration model, a way to document how awakened empaths naturally channeled their power toward healing rather than harm. He kept his case files on these transformations among his most tightly guarded research. Jung feared that if the wrong people learned how to deliberately trigger empathic transformation, it could be weaponized. He dispersed his findings across multiple private journals, never publishing the complete picture in his lifetime. Near the end of his career, Jung's final notes revealed something striking. These individuals had become what I call balanced warriors. People capable of astonishing gentleness with those who had earned it and implacable strength with those who threatened it. They were living templates of what Jung believed might be humanity's next evolutionary stage. Beings who could feel everything without being destroyed, see everything without succumbing to cynicism, and love deeply without losing themselves. His last reflection on these transformed empaths was clear. Their journey was never from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They had not grown less empathetic, they had become perfectly empathetic. Jung left a single caution to future psychologists: never underestimate someone who has learned to trust their own perceptions completely. The awakened empath, he believed, represented psychology's most powerful evolution. Comment if you've reached the point where you trust your intuition completely. I no longer doubt what I see and feel. Jung's observations proved prophetic in ways he could hardly imagine. Modern research now affirms what his cases revealed decades earlier. Empaths who undergo shadow integration become psychologically invincible. They cannot be gaslighted because they fully trust their perceptions. They cannot be manipulated because they detect emotional games before they even begin to form. They cannot be broken because they have already been to the bottom and emerged stronger. This, Jung believed, is what makes his empath case studies eternally relevant. Every empath will face their transformation moment, the betrayal so deep it forces a choice: remain a victim or become sovereign. The question is never whether the empath will snap. The question is whether they will integrate their shadow consciously, like the cases Jung documented, or allow it to consume them destructively. His research revealed something extraordinary. When pushed to the breaking point, most empaths chose integration. They did not become cruel. They became precise. They did not lose their hearts. They grew backbones. The transformed empath, Jung wrote, embodied love with boundaries, a person capable of caring deeply while fully protecting themselves. This was his final insight into these cases, and it continues to echo through psychology circles today. These individuals did not become different people. They became who they had always been, beneath the conditioning. Every empath carries the potential to become psychologically untouchable. What it requires is the right catalyst, betrayal, that forces the transformation. Jung summarized it poignantly: the empath's greatest tragedy is not their sensitivity. It is how long they wait to honor it properly. And so we return full circle, back to where this began. Jung's documentation of a psychological pattern so unsettling that he once called it the most terrifying transformation in human nature. These were not isolated anomalies. They represented a fundamental truth about empathic psychology. What Jung revealed still makes many psychologists uncomfortable today. Empaths are not naturally victims. They are naturally powerful. It is society that conditions them to suppress that power in the name of being acceptable. When an empath finally snaps, they are not breaking. They are awakening to abilities they possessed all along. Jung's private files revealed the truth manipulators would prefer remain hidden. The kindest people are often the strongest people, because kindness without strength only enables dysfunction. The awakened empaths he studied were not fragile survivors. They were evolution in action. Individuals who could feel everything, perceive everything, and yet choose consciously rather than react unconsciously. Over decades, Jung observed patients who appeared gentle, even broken, until something inside them shifted. His research proved that the empath's path was never about becoming less sensitive. It was about becoming consciously sensitive. And consciousness, Jung concluded, was the force that transformed victims into forces of nature. The most beautiful revelation was this: in their awakening, these empaths never lost their capacity for love. They simply learned to love themselves with the same intensity they once reserved only for others. And that is the heart of Jung's discovery. To every empath reading this, your sensitivity is not your weakness. It is your weapon. The day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful. Not dangerous to the innocent, but dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. That is precisely what the world needs more of: empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light to make others comfortable. Jung left us with one essential question: not whether empaths will transform, but whether they will do it consciously, or allow life itself to force the transformation upon them. Comment below: I choose conscious transformation. If you are ready to become the integrated empath Jung described, then understand this: the world does not need more broken empaths. It needs more awakened ones. And Jung's research proves that transformation is not only possible, it is inevitable. The empath will snap. The only question is, will you direct that power, or will it direct you? Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.